Welcome everyone. As you've joined us, could you please share in the chat function your name, the organization that you represent and your role there, where you currently are, what part of the world are you right now? And if you could name a TV show, a movie, or a book that you recommend that we watch or read. So that would be interesting to see what everyone gets to share. So please share that in the chat function. We'll take a minute or two before we move to our agenda for today. Awesome. I see a number of interesting recommendations already from Lisa. I Nevers on HBO. Amazing. From Emmanuel. Emmanuel is joining us from Ghana. From Katie, I would recommend that everyone reads Homegoing. Thanks, Katie. Great. So to the agenda for today, we would be beginning with introductions. Last month, we had our first kickoff and we listened to all of your amazing ideas. And today we'll be delving deeper based on many of the ideas and thoughts that you shared with us at our last meeting. We are very pleased to have a guest presenter with us today, Katie Safford. She's with the Global Knowledge Initiative, and she'll be taking us through some ideas. Bonnie and I would also be co-facilitating with Katie as well. We would also be reviewing our Youth System Strengthening COP Charter. That's a new document in the works that Bonnie would be telling us more about shortly. Today we'll be discussing what do we mean by youth system strengthening and how can we apply the Iceberg model to system strengthening. We would also be taking questions from you. We would love to hear your thoughts and reflections as we move along, and we'll be wrapping up the session at the end of the day. Great. Bonnie, do you want to take the next slide? Okay, so our facilitator for today, like I said, is Katie Safford. She's a manager with the Global Knowledge Initiative. Myself, Victoria, I'm the youth advisor to the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice. And Bonnie Paulis, she's the COP champion of the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice.
Oops, hello. Hi, so would you raise your hand? You could put your, if you can in the chat, put your, if you raised your hand, if you attended the kickoff event, just so we'll see all the people who were there. Thank you. Lisa and others are putting that up. I think we can go on to the next slide. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the charter. We can go to the next slide. So every community of practice is using a charter, and we are going to be creating ours together. This is an aim to sort of orient the work so that we all have a common understanding about what it's going to mean to be a part of this community of practice. We want it to serve as a guide and a reference tool. And it's going to outline sort of what's the scope of our work, how are we going to engage with each other, what the expectations are, and the activities. So we're going to share this at the end of the of our session today, and you will have Victoria will tell you where you can get it and how. And we'd like your comments back by May 20th. So in our June meeting, we can go ahead and present sort of what we hope will be the final version. So thank you for that. So now we're going to move on to what is system strengthening.
Great. What is a system? A system is a collection of different components which works together to achieve a goal. A system is a set of actors and interactions that form a coherent whole. It performs specific functions, and it also has a boundary that sets it apart from the rest of the world. What are some characteristics of a system? So a system is comprised of 4 main components. And the first is that the system has boundaries. So boundaries mean that the system can function in autonomy. And an example of a boundary can be, take for example, a country like the United States or somewhere in Africa like Nigeria, where I come from. You can do certain things within that country if you're a citizen of that country, but once you step out of that country, there is limit to what you can do. The laws that protects you in the country where you are no longer protects you. So a system usually have boundaries. As many of us come from the development space, boundaries can be, national, it can be regional, it can even be like very minute within the communities where we work. System also have actors. Actors can be individuals. They can also be institutions. They are usually actors involved when it comes to systems. Systems don't often operate or exist alone. Also, systems have enabling environments that make it what they are, and these enabling environments make it possible for the different actors to interact with each other. And finally, systems are often interdependent, so they have linkages, they are dependent on each other. A good example can be a tree. When you see a tree, there are different parts of the tree. There is a trunk, there are there is the leaf, the branches, and all of those things. In a way, all of these can operate on their own, like the leaf can operate independently, but they are all linked in some ways, like the roots would give you nutrients. So the system can be simple, but then when they interact, they can be complex at the same time. So an example of this can be private and public partnerships. Systems are all around us. As you can see on the screen, there are all kinds of systems: education, community and family, workforce development, food systems, safety and security, and so on. And I'm sure many of you are working one or two systems that exist on the screen, or even systems that are not listed here today. Everything is all connected when it comes to systems, but don't let that overwhelm you. As a person, you are a complex system within a system of infinite systems. As we understand how things are connected, we are able to make better decisions. So today we'll be looking at some of the systems that we work in, and how can we understand how they function, and how can we apply systems thinking to the work that we do.
So as Victoria alluded to, one of the ways that we can sort of unpack the complexity of the systems within the systems within the systems is systems thinking. And this is a process that we can use to also help to strengthen and change systems. And so systems thinking at the heart of it looks at understanding how these systems and their components are interconnected, are working together, and to sort of look at those in discrete parts so that we can understand them at the individual level and then at the connected level. And so by utilizing systems thinking, we view youth development as a system of interacting parts. Another thing that systems thinking can help us do and understand is to better understand where we might intervene within the system. And so in systems thinking language, these are called leverage points. And this is basically a point within the system that if we are able to change it, this would cause a ripple effect throughout the entire system. And so it would be one small change could cause a very large change in the system, because as we know, all of these pieces are interconnected. And so for the continuum of approaches, to put this in context of what we commonly talk about in international development and the work that we do, a lot of times we focus on this smaller bubble and we look at the sector that we're working in. So for instance, you might work in the health sector or the education sector. If we look one level up, we then start to think about how those sectors are interacting with one another at the cross-sectoral level. And then if we go one level even farther up, we are then looking at systems. And so as Victoria explained on the slide with the house and all the systems around us, we interact with many systems on a day-to-day basis. And so by understanding how those systems are affecting us, are affecting youth, can help us to better plan and work better within those systems. And so, yeah, I will pass it on to Bonnie. Yep.
Hi. So yes, so part of our role here in this is called the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice. We want to sort of begin to zero in on what we know about what's happening to actually shift systems from a youth development perspective, and certainly on the Youth Power site and a lot of the work each of you is doing around the world. The whole concept of positive youth development has become more embedded. So we're trying to move from the left side, all those things about viewing youth as problems and lacking things and draining society, to how young people are contributors, assets, and actually have many, many skills that can, and as we say, should be mobilized from those three areas: human, social, and economic capital. So part of our work in this community of practice is to understand better and trying to start to provide examples of what's going on, where people are actually using the research and the data that's come over the last 20 to 25 years about positive youth development to not only impact what was in the smaller circle in the previous slide about individual sectors and programs, but also about how it's impacting the systems they exist in, so that we're making broader changes to impact millions and millions of more young people. So we can go to the next one. So we have this typical and hopefully a systems approach to how we want to think about this, that again, typically, without going through and reading these, you can do that. It's really this basis of systems have evolved over time, whether it's juvenile justice, crime and violence prevention, education, is that there are problems to be solved. And we want to develop projects that have sometimes very limited participation to try and address how you think, what that problem is and how we're going to solve it. And many of these lack these unsustainable, non-scalable outputs. What we're trying to do is to learn more about how we can have the systems approach, thinking about system strengthening, where we view partners in a different way, we have different kinds of shared accountability, we engage in a different way in the design of what the work will be, in the design of how policies can change, in the design about how financing systems need to change and legislation. So all of these things need to happen in new ways because we would be asking different questions. So we want to think about sustainability, we want to think about scaling, and we want to think about systems level impacts. So we want to remember that systems exist. There's a history to how each of wherever you're living, how education systems, healthcare systems, crime and violence, workforce development, all of these systems have people who have been trained to look within their own body of work and become experts and try and solve whatever they think the problem is. So there is a history, which means people have been trained at the university level to think in ways, when they come into the workforce, when they grow in their career. There's a history to how we've grown these systems. So there's also the policies and the legislation and certainly the financing that we have to understand. And what we're trying to do, as I said before, is to move this whole approach from a problem focus to one about that we actually do know things that are working. And what our goal is to take the things that are working and expand them to ever-growing numbers of young people around the world, which means all of those things, the policies, the legislation, the financing, those things have to change, the relationships, the outcome measures, the shared accountability. So that's what we're going to be doing and trying focusing on the assets and strengths of young people as we think about all this. So one example that we've had in looking over time, this is from some work we did through Equip3 that USAID funded several years ago, is really looking at what was working to change in preparing out of school youth from the education sector. So over time, these bulleted and highlighted and bolded options have become to be known as sort of various things that can be done to change outcomes for young people, whether it's new kinds of assessments rather than sitting down and taking sometimes, you know, just taking the old kinds of exams weren't the best way we were getting what young people were really learning. There's all new types of alternative assessment processes. There's new types of involving young people in designing and evaluating programs that are going on. We've been looking at alternative delivery and flexible schedules. All of these things can come together in sort of saying, oh, we need to shift the way we have the education system to the realities of today and looking forward into what young people need. And all of these things provide new opportunities for young people to show what they're learning in ways that we might not have allowed before. Go to the next one. And this is from a group in Washington, D.C. at the Columbia Heights Education Campus. And I just wanted to share it as an example of taking what had been a very linear approach to thinking what education should be and what the outcomes should be, to be able to tell their story about what their academic and career curriculum looks like, what the climate in the schools should be to allow for the best growth and success of young people, the role of social emotional efforts embedded in a school curriculum, and thinking about, rather than just, you know, the grade that you get at the end of the semester, but how are we defining success for young people? And so these words and these approaches become a whole new way for an education system to say, we are able to show from a positive youth development perspective based in research that young people are succeeding and are going to be able to move on.
So now that we know what systems thinking, systems strengthening, and systems change is, we now need to understand how we might apply this. And so one of the ways we can apply systems thinking is a methodology called the Iceberg Model. Many of you might be familiar with this. And thanks to Titanic, we're all familiar with you know, how an iceberg is mostly underwater rather than above the water. But Katie, if you click through to you can click through all of them actually. The iceberg model consists of 4 different layers. And so by using the iceberg model, we are able to understand and swim a bit deeper into the water, if you will, to understand and unpack the different component parts of an opportunity or a challenge we're experiencing. And so at the first level, at the surface level, we see events, and this is what's happening, what we are experiencing. And this is generally how we look at problems and challenges and opportunities in our lives. We just look at what we experience. Sometimes our brains are able to go a little bit deeper and we're able to understand a pattern, pick up on something that might be happening repetitively, and you think that there might be a reason why that's happening over and over again. And so that's a layer deeper. And this is also looking at the rules, the policies, the practices, and the resource flows that continue these patterns. And then if we dig even a level deeper, where we start to look at the structures and how are the relationships and the power dynamics affecting this system or affecting this challenge that we're experiencing. And then if we go even deeper, we start to look at mental models. And this is looking at how our assumptions and beliefs and values are what those are telling us about the system, and how other people might also be looking at those, using their mental models to think differently about the system. And this also tells us what beliefs are keeping the system in place. So why is the system continuing to behave the way it's behaving? What are our mental models and underlying assumptions keeping that in place? And so we can use the iceberg model to understand and think a bit differently and unpack those interconnected pieces of a system. And so I'll pass it over to Victoria to walk us through an example of this.
Thanks, Katie. So we can use an example from education, and let's see from everything that Katie has analyzed how that plays out. First, let's take a scenario of a student who always arrives late to class every Tuesday on Tuesday. So this is an event or a series of events. And then next, we begin to see patterns and trend. Not only is this student late to class on a Tuesday, this student is late to class every Tuesday. So there's a series of, trend over time there. Next, structures. It's so interesting how, we often don't think of how, systems are connected. This example is focused mainly on, the school system or education, but other structures or parts that may be related might be that the student cannot afford the cost of transportation, or the student lives in a neighborhood where it's impossible, for the bus system to get to that kind of neighborhood. And what are the mental models? What are some of the assumptions or beliefs that exist because we haven't fully understand what the problem is, or we haven't fully gotten to the root of the problem? Some assumptions may be that the student is lazy, or that the student is trying to avoid school, or they're not taking their education seriously. The Iceberg model is just one out of many systems thinking tools, but this one is one that we found to be very practical because you can easily analyze the different parts of systems thinking using the Iceberg model. And now we're going to move to the next slide.
So we are going to break out into groups of the following three, of the three following groups. And we're going to allow you all to self-select into the group that you're most interested in. So we're going to be focusing on workforce development, health, physical and mental health, and crime and violence prevention. And so in each of these breakout groups, we're going to have, I think, 15 minutes to work through the Iceberg model as a group. And so we're going to be working in Jamboards, which I will share my screen and walk you through a little bit about how to use Jamboards. So basically, Jamboards is a whiteboard where we can interactively work together and share sticky notes and post sticky notes. Is everyone able to see my screen? Okay. So just to give you an idea of what you need to use, we have 6 different pages of the Jamboard. The first page is just the example of the Iceberg model, so you can refer back to this while you're in breakout groups, just to make sure you know what we're working through. And then we have a board for each of the 3 topics. And so based on what topic you decide to focus on, you'll go to your selected page by clicking through these arrows. And really the only other functionality that you need today is this sticky note functionality. So it's the 4th down from the sidebar on the left. It looks like a little sticky note. It's a little piece of paper. And so if you click this, a window will pop up and you're able to write in whatever you want to write in. You can also change the color if you so wish. And then you press save. And so then if you can see in the background, it pops up. You can continue typing, or if you want to exit from this sticky note box, you'll press cancel. And you can click on these and move it to where it should be placed within the Iceberg model. It's fairly simple. Each of the breakout rooms will have one of us, Bonnie, Victoria, or I, in it. And so we'll also be able to support you and walk you through this. And you can also delete it by just simply pressing the delete button. So we will be, I guess, Katie, you can put the breakout rooms up on the screen. And the way that you'll be able to choose your own breakout room is either you can hover over it and it will just say join, or you need to hover over, there will be a number which shows you the number of people who have joined that breakout room. You hover over that, join will pop up and you press join. If you have any issues, Katie Pons will be in the main room and will be able to support you in choosing which room you want to join. And so as you go into your breakout room, like I said, you'll each have a facilitator for the room, but we'll talk through sort of a opportunity or system that you want to focus on, a subsystem within your primary topic, and you can work through the Iceberg model collectively as a group and have a conversation. So Katie P, please take us away in our breakout rooms.
The breakout rooms are open, so you should be able to choose which one you want now.
Thanks, Katie.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome back. I think people are still trickling in, perhaps. So we did want to offer the opportunity for a group and a person, perhaps if they're interested, to present their iceberg model and some of the things that stood out from the iceberg model activity. So if anyone is interested in sharing, please come off mute or raise your hand by using the reactions bar if you'd like to share, and we can pull up the Jamboard and share that.
Well, this is Bonnie. I hope it's one of the other two groups because we couldn't really get in. We had the discussion, but we couldn't get into our Jamboard. So if somebody else did, go for it.
This is Chelsea. I can highlight some of what we discussed in the health group.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. I can share my screen real quick to aid you in your.
Oh, look at that.
Perfect.
Great.
Oh, yeah. It looks like the workforce group has a lot of more notes than us. So, I can keep it brief in case they also want to chime in. Great. Thanks so much for bringing up. Perhaps unsurprising to this group, the first event that came to mind for us when thinking about health, although we certainly know it has had an impact across all these different sectors, is the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we really focused on that as our key event when really thinking about youth physical and mental health. I would actually even say, as you can even see by what we have below, mental health, I'd say, was a larger topic of our discussion than physical health. So for patterns and trends, we talked a lot about access, I would say. So really thinking about, access as it relates to, I guess I should say it came up under patterns and trends as well as structures, because there is a structured aspect to access and quality of access to those services. But we talked about differences in access among marginalized communities, including youth, that might just be in more isolated settings where services are not available. We talked about just how there's been a broader discussion about concerns related to mental health, including the stigma in seeking mental health services, which I think is a pattern and trend, but also falls a bit under mental models that we highlighted here in terms of acceptance of mental health issues as a real concern that needs to be addressed, and differences in acceptance of addressing mental health concerns between generations even. So also, again, a bit of a pattern and trend that we noted. We talked about safety. So not to get too much into the crime and violence groups territory, but my background is in violence against women. So I was thinking about the uptick in violence that we've seen during COVID-19 and how that can certainly also be impacting accessibility of services among different vulnerable groups. And we also highlighted a course related to structures, availability of services in communities, including both the vaccine as well as mental health services. On a related note, certainly here in the US, a key factor in facilitating that access was internet access. So, whether it be registering or identifying available physical mental health resources and how that internet access varies by different settings. On a related note, as it relates to internet access, we also talked about the role of social media in promoting mental health and self-care during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as breaking down stereotypes in terms of who is impacted by COVID-19 and who is impacted by the mental health repercussions of COVID-19, including thinking about men and their needs, and young boys, their needs as well. And then we also talked a little bit about some other kind of structures related to the role of schools in kind of providing that supportive social emotional learning environment, as well as the capacity and having a workforce with the capacity and trained workers to really help promote and facilitate both access as well as addressing just COVID-19 related impacts. So perhaps I'll stop there. And just to let others chime in as well from my group, or let the other group also provide some of their inputs.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Chelsea. That was a great summary. And I think it also brings an important point that although we focus on one system currently, because that tends to be where our expertise lies, you brought in many other systems and you were like, I don't want to get into the crime and violence prevention space, but they're all interconnected. And so we tend to think in things of boundaries and sectors, but the whole point of this is that once you work through an activity like this, you realize that they really are interconnected, and it's important to talk about all of those pieces and not just one. So this is a great example. Thank you for sharing. So in the interest of time, I think we'll move back to the slides. We have a few wrap-up slides to walk through. So I will stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Bonnie, I believe.
Sure. So we wanted to just keep some things in mind as we start to get into this more. And part of this exercise was begin to say that while there are individual systems that exist with all their policies and structures like health and education and workforce, just that came up in that example, and as Katie said, part of this is about how do the systems interact, because as we all know from all of the youth development research, we keep talking about whole young people. And young people don't interact with just one system, they interact with many. And part of our role in this is to say, while we want to go deep and understand how we might be getting examples of real changes in how the mental health system may be working in a country, we also want to always be asking sort of who else are they bringing into that discussion from the education sector, from others. So we actually also might think at some point in this process of doing a combined one of these meetings with one of the other communities of practice where we really focus in on that connection to learn more about that. So we want to think about how the processes, can help your work become stronger. We know that this whole issue of thinking about systems change is terribly disruptive because people are used to the way they do things, and they're just, everything's in place. Training systems are in place. Employee evaluations are in place, the language that we use in those, how we're identifying what success is, all these things maybe need to be redefined in order to really change the system. The more we practice, hopefully our muscles get stronger and we understand more and we can do more. And that obviously requires the voices of many of us to get this holistic understanding and action on changing systems. So the next slide. So Katie's gonna take over, but we want to focus in the next meeting. We want to pick a system And we want to get from you what we say are the primary ones, or the ones that really rise up to the top over the next few calls, that we want to get people on, including maybe some of you that we'll reach out to talk about work that's actually going on where we are seeing changes in how the system is working, and learn from that process that's going on from different sectors. So in order to know what our priorities are as a community of practice, we want to do this Slido word cloud, which Katie is going to help us do.
Thanks, Bonnie. So I just posted a link in the chat for the Slido word cloud. So if you click on that link, it will pull up and offer you the same question. And you can enter as many as you want, but we are trying to prioritize systems of interest. So please share with us what system or systems do we want to focus on as a COP. And we will show the results if Katie, you're able to switch tabs, or I can share. Perfect.
Just curious, is there an opportunity for us to think of how we can partner with other COPs as they're developing their conversation? Because it would seem that this is a very, this would be a way to be very integrative across all the COPs, Bonnie and Victoria. And as I sit in on and participate with others, I see a lot of linkages, and I like to leverage resources. So that was just be my conversation piece here.
And the answer is yes. Lara has already reached out about maybe doing something across R2. And so, yes, we will definitely follow up on that. And any suggestions you want to give us in terms of prioritizing those? I mean, obviously what we're looking at as we're doing this is certainly workforce development and education. Looks then,
right,
you know, sort of mental health are sort of rising to the top. But we'll, you know, we're not going to be able to do it all, but we will probably try and pick. And yes, I think that's a great idea. And I'm totally with you about leveraging resources and trying to make sure we get the most out of all of this.
Well, I would just make a plug for the higher education engagement transformation group, the HEAT group, just because their most recent conversation actually talked about and shared some examples of employability or service learning opportunities, just some things to think about as to how we could then bring real life examples into this.
Great.
Bonnie, just as I'm all like digesting all this and thinking about it, can you just restate again if what we would do with the system that we focus on as a COP? Are we going to be analyzing it, looking for, just give me some more clarity. So I'm just trying to get my head around it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to understand a few things. The way things are currently functioning, there's ways things that are happening, but we want to focus on, I'll just give you an example. There's a lot of work going on in the US where young people who are in the mental health system are now intricately involved with national policymakers on revamping how the mental health system works for young people. They are coming from the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system. They've been in the mental health system, and they are involved from at the national, state, and local levels, looking at policies and helping to revamp what's going on. So we need to understand sort of what the issue is, how the system is currently working, but we want to be able, because we don't have a lot of time on these things, we can always share links, but to dig in with people who are actually engaged in making those changes, and what their struggles are, what their successes have been, what the successes have been built on, and what they're seeing as sort of sustainable outcomes that's making a change for larger numbers of young people. So, I mean, this was just a way to try and help us sort of decide which we might want to begin to focus on from this perspective. And if we can link up with one of the other communities of practice that are working on that issue and dig in together, that would be even better. Does that help?
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is, you know, it's hard to pick if we're saying TVET, are we picking it in a country? Are we picking in a region? Globally seems too big.
No,
so it becomes super specific. So So I guess I was wondering if something broader that would tie us all together, like donor-funded positive youth development systems, or I don't know, that's very big, but I'm just wondering how that, as a community practice, we can address something as specific as a TVET system, just because that's one of the examples given.
I mean, I don't have.
Or mental health system in the US also is very specific. So I don't know if that's something, it's very much a case study approach. So the community practice would be taking on kind of a case study approach to just fill out the evidence base, but starting with kind of examples and case studies to inform more broadly. Is that kind of the thinking?
Well, I mean, it should be our thinking. I mean, what I think we need to do is hear from people who are involved here, what's going to be most useful to them, and we'll try and make that happen. So if other people have thoughts, either right now, because I know we're going to be towards the end of this,
Okay.
or you can send it certainly to Victoria and me and sort of say, this is, and we'll try and sort of pull that together and try in the next meeting to at least begin going down the road that we're hearing people are most interested in. But I think we've got to, I think from my experience, unless we can sort of get deep and try and understand what's actually happening in at least a few of these as examples, then we may just be left with a lot of generalizations that aren't maybe going to be as helpful. So if we can dig a little bit into, if it's TVET, are there examples from Uganda? Is there an example where Uganda or El Salvador has really said, okay, our national ministry down to, or these are the changes that are going on. We've made changes in the financing of this, you know, what's actually happened. Does that help at all? So if people could just, I mean, just, you know, part of this is we've got to, and some of this can be, Victoria's going to talk about the charter and getting comments, but beyond the charter, if you can send us back any other ideas about the level of, attention we should give, at what level of the system you're most interested in, we can try and really focus in on that beginning in the next call in June.
Thanks, Bunny. And maybe you can also share your email address and I'll also share mine. We want to, gather all of your ideas and suggestions as much as possible, but we also want to be very mindful of time. So please feel free to share these ideas beyond the I will speak briefly to the COP charter. The charter is a document that we are creating to give us a roadmap of, how do we want the youth system strengthening community of practice to operate, and what are our plans for sustainability beyond, now for the next 1 year, for the next 6 months. So we want to gather thoughts and ideas from you. We have already started, developing the foundation of the charter, but we want it to be as collaborative as possible. And I'm going to share the link here now, but also email the charter to you after this course, just so that you have that in your email address. Please find time to, comment on it, to share ideas and thoughts with us. I really loved how you shared, Lisa, about what's already working in other COPs and how we can, collaborate. So please share your thoughts and ideas with us. And here is the link to the Google documents. And also other things that we want to share with you is to remember to register on the YP2LE website if you've not done so. And we'll be sharing the slides to today's presentation and the link to the recording on the YP2LE platform. And our next meeting is going to be on the 10th of June at the same time, and we look forward to seeing you there as well.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Here are some additional resources. We're going to keep, and if you all have others, please feel free to share them. We think we're trying to just find things that can be helpful. There isn't sort of one exact, there are many different ways to think about systems change and system strengthening. We're trying to, try to zero in on sort of what we talked about, the Iceberg Model and some things. We know there are others, but again, we'll just try and sort of take what we hear from you and start to really dig into what's being learned around the world and is actually happening to help make these systems change for young people. So thank you. We'll see you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.